All right. It is great to be here with Scott Hanson, and you are the AGWM Strategic Initiatives Director, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and it is great that you've been here in Panama with the area directors.
I've loved it.
During this time. I really appreciate you and Karen coming down to be with us during
Absolutely.
our conversations. We're here to talk about gospel access. But before we get into some of the questions I have, I think it would be good for those people who are going to be watching this video. I'm thinking of missionaries. I'm thinking of some people that have been maybe our supporters in this. Maybe it would be good for them to know who you are, maybe a little bit of your background, and then we can get into some of these questions.
Yeah, so my life started in missions when I was 6 years old. 1976, my parents went to Ethiopia, and we served as missionaries there.
Okay.
Ended up growing up in Africa as a missionary kid. 1993, was appointed as a full-time missionary. My wife is also an MK. So we went back to Africa in 1994 and spent 18 years in Tanzania, working with national missions programs, strategic church planting, and that sort of thing. Then we moved to Kenya and worked on the leadership team, serving the continent of Africa in strategy and development.
Yeah.
And last year, John talked to us about coming over to the States and joining the team. And as he began to unpack gospel access and where he was headed, that just really resonated with our hearts. And so we said yes, and now we're on a new adventure in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is an honor to have you, to have this conversation. I know we've been talking about this, but I think this is going to help maybe bring it down to where some of us are at and help make a bridge to where maybe some people a little bit maybe ahead of us in this conversation and bring us up to speed. And getting us kind of talking the same language. I think the other thing that's great about this is you've had a vantage point of working both with missionaries and with national churches.
Yes.
And so I think as we hear your heart on this, we're going to be able to see kind of how we can get to where John is calling us to. So I feel real good about that. First of all, could you just give us a clear and concise explanation of what is gospel access? I mean, what does it mean, and why is it a central focus for AGWM right now at this time?
No, absolutely. So gospel access, boiled down, is three things. The first thing is a gospel access priority for every missionary. So let me back up one step. When you talk about gospel access, I look at it as a continuum of people who won't say yes to Jesus to people who can't say yes to Jesus because of barriers. So Springfield, Missouri, there's a lot of lost people. There's also 300 or 400 churches. I think there's a church for every 500 people. While there are people who don't know about Jesus, they run into churches. There's Bibles they can read. There's Christians they can be witness to. As you move to different places, say a country where it's a Muslim country but not necessarily illegal or not necessarily unreached, versus an unreached people group versus an unengaged unreached people group, each of those have increasingly more barriers to being able to say yes to Jesus.
Sure.
And an unengaged, unreached people group would be at the very far end. That those are people groups that not only are unreached, which is less than 2% evangelical, but they have no witness. There's no missionary targeting them. So that's, if you look at gospel access as a continuum, as missionaries, one of the things that we are looking at is how do we invest what we're doing and where we're at in a strategic way that not only ministers to where God has called us, but also leverages what we're doing to help peoples and places that don't have access to the gospel hear about Jesus. So in order to do that, there are three basic components to gospel access. The first is every missionary has a gospel access priority. So today we heard a beautiful representation of that by Mary with child.
And that's Mary Mann, who is the director of Child Hope.
Yes. And so she said, I'm so excited about gospel access. We're thinking about creating a gospel access curriculum that we can put into our schools so that our kids can pray for people who don't have access to the gospel. I love that. That is a gospel access priority. It doesn't take away from what she's doing. It enhances it and increases the amount of people who are thinking about, praying about, and putting energy into seeing those who don't have access to the gospel have a chance to say yes to Jesus. The second part of that is we have a target of reaching 2,085 unengaged, unreached people groups. Again, those are people groups that are not only unreached, but they have no missionary presence.
Yeah.
It's very cool because around the world in different denominations, different missions organizations, it's like God has been speaking to us that there are people groups that don't have access. And so our goal is by 2033, as we partner with our brothers and sisters around the world, we would like to see every one of those unengaged, unreached people groups reached.
Yeah.
And on our end, the third part of that is in AGWM, we want to see an increase to 4,000 total missionaries around the world, all of us with a focus on, hey, what can we do to leverage what God has called us to do to help see those unengaged, unreached places, peoples that don't have access to the gospel come to know Him.
Yeah, that's good. So it's us, thinking about what we're doing, emphasizing that gospel access. How do we increase gospel access in our ministry? And then the idea of how do we target, prioritize those people that don't have a witness. And then it's how do we respond ourselves as an organization to bring more missionaries to the field, to see more opportunities for increasing that gospel access.
So well summarized.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think it leads right into where a lot of us are living on a day-by-day basis. We came into this with the idea that we are going to be reaching and that we are going to be preaching that gospel to places where it hasn't been done before. And so that's helpful for me to be able to hear that. Now, coming into our context in Latin America, Caribbean, and speaking as an area director serving many veteran missionaries, people that are deeply committed to ministry, how would you encourage them to stay focused on the apostolic priority of increasing gospel access, especially when they seem to be engaged in so many good and necessary works? I think maybe what you were speaking about with Mary was an example of that, but maybe you could give us some other ideas in doing that.
Yeah, I think this is this there's a tension that we walk and manage. And I think it's the same tension we expect our local churches who support us in America to do, right? We say, you need to have a heart for missions. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reaching your own neighborhoods and discipling people you work with, witnessing to your family members. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. So really, this is an encouragement that lets us have one more lens that says, what can I be doing that will make a difference so that people who don't have access to Jesus will have access to Him? John was telling us the other day about a missionary from Costa Rica who went to Equatorial Guinea, and she led someone to Jesus who became the general superintendent. I mean, it's like a 20 or 30 year story. And to me, that's a beautiful example of gospel access, right? Because John and Jennifer poured into her at one point and helped her to become a missionary, developed her. And then as she went out, the impact was now one of the people they discipled is the leader of an entire nation, national church. So ways that we can, again, leverage our influence, season our conversations, instill vision, be that prophetic voice to those we work with, as well as maybe it means something for us individually.
Yeah, I appreciate the both and quality of the response. The reality that a lot of people are doing things they feel deeply committed to, but it is thinking about how do I continue to exercise that apostolic function? How do I continue to push those barriers back to gospel access? How do I keep thinking about reaching the unreached, and especially those unreached and unengaged? I appreciate that. Yeah.
And we will never finish the task. On our own. If we decided all at once that we would all be pioneers as Assemblies of God World missionaries, we would never finish the task. The beauty of where we're at in this moment of time is that we have so many partner churches to go with. Instead of just being Americans, we have 130 different mission sending agencies around the world that are part of World Assemblies of God Fellowship that we partner with, that share this vision.
Boy, I appreciate that. That's so important to me to hear you say the fact that this isn't just an American, a U.S. American enterprise, that we are working with partners from around the world to see this challenge met, to see us reach this goal. That's super important. I appreciate that. And that really leads into kind of the next question that I have here. we're engaging with strong national partners.
Yes.
Our area is Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico. How do we then communicate this renewed emphasis on gospel access in a way that honors their leadership, that affirms what God is already doing among them, and then strengthens partnership rather than trying to redirect it?
No, I love that. So I think part of what missionaries bring when we move into a context is a prophetic voice and a different lens. And when we talk about gospel access and reaching those who don't have access to Jesus, that doesn't diminish other important ministry that's going on in a church.
Yeah.
But I believe that God uses us, calls us at certain moments to bring a certain perspective, that we speak prophetically to a church, not in a way that diminishes what they're already doing, but rather that says, hey, we believe God is leading us into adding something new, a new direction that we can add into what we're already doing in our ministry and in our church planting and our discipleship. And it's an invitation into where God is leading in an apostolic sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, if done right, it's honoring to those that we work with, as opposed to dishonoring.
Okay. So would you say that we're sharing with them, if you will, a stirring that God is doing in our hearts, and we're inviting them to join us in this work, not de-emphasizing maybe some of their priorities, but just saying, hey, this is where we feel God is leading us. Can you join with us, or can we work together to reach these goals together?
Yeah, I like the can, instead of can you join with us, can we work together?
Yeah.
What is the Lord speaking to us?
Yeah.
Have you thought about the fact that this city in your country has almost no evangelical witness?
Yeah.
What is the Lord speaking to us about that? Did you know, when you look at the map of South America and you see all those red dots that represent a UUPG, man, do you think the Lord loves those people? What do you think? I feel this stirring. What do you think we could do if we did it together?
Yeah, I like that. I like that invitation language and the idea of this is something that we can do together.
Yeah.
I appreciate that very much. Yeah. So let me ask this. When we're talking about gospel access, what should we be measuring along the way? How do we know if we're going to be making real progress among these people who still lack access to the gospel?
So we are developing tools that talk about different ways that you can engage. So it's specifically when you're talking about people groups or unengaged, unreached places, there are ways that you can measure, hey, do we have increased prayer? Have we started going on short-term trips? Ultimately, engagement is about long-term residential gospel proclamation in a way that is establishing an indigenous church done in local language and local culture. So if we have those three elements, that's how we measure engagement. So on the one sense, it's easy to measure. The hard thing is that's a long process.
Yeah.
And so in order not to be discouraged, I think it's good to have markers along the way that allow us to say, hey, so in my role, I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to try to get 5 churches in my country I work with praying for an unengaged, unreached people group, or a town that doesn't have any gospel access. Or we're going to try to get a team from our partner church and go together to visit one of these places and to begin to dream and strategize about it. So putting some of those markers help us feel like we're making progress, as opposed to when we finally hit the 3 indicators, which still doesn't mean the church is planted.
Correct.
That just means it's now engaged.
It's engaged.
Yeah. And a lot of these places, it takes years.
And I did notice that looking at the doxa.life website that you mentioned in our meetings, that one of those markers, that engagement in, actually the prayer focus is there, in seeing that as one of the markers, having people adopting those for prayer, and focusing on that. Of course, as we begin to pray about things, the Lord begins to stir our hearts to do something about it as well. So,
and one of the things I love is I think one of the hallmark characteristics of many of our churches around the world is they know how to pray.
Yeah.
Probably a lot better than we do sometimes in
Mm.
America. And you think of 450,000
Wow.
churches,
Yeah.
and the potential of focused prayer as we begin to lean in and engage.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things Doxa is a part of the World Assemblies of God Fellowship. It's
Yeah.
our missions commission
Yes.
that's helping us to focus on the unengaged.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about that.
And I'm thinking even one step further, the idea that as World AG Fellowship has prioritized planting 1 million churches,
Yes.
so getting to that place of 1 million churches, and to think of those churches having that prayer for the unreached and
Yes.
the unreached and unengaged in their DNA,
Yes.
how powerful that would be.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's really neat. Now, for missionaries and leaders personally, what kind of spiritual mindset, again, we're talking about prayer here, is necessary? That spiritual posture is necessary to stay aligned with gospel access for the long haul.
Yeah, that's such a great question. How do we cultivate the apostolic flame? And I think prayer, reading is a part of that. I mean, what's always been most impactful to me, not always practical, is go visit a place where there's no churches, no believers, no Bibles.
Okay.
And look around, and every person you see, is damned to a Christless existence. Not because they're rejecting Christ,
Right.
but because they've never been given the chance to say yes.
Mm.
I've been to multiple places like that in people groups, and every time I walk away, it's transformational.
Yeah.
Now, that's not always practical, but I do think prayer is very easy to do.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know, reading the Bible,
Yeah.
looking at it from the lens of people group lenses of Jesus's heart for the world. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that engagement with missionaries, one of the things that it's so easy is that we stay in our lane.
Yes.
And especially it's easy to silo ourselves, whether it's in our area or in our region, or perhaps in our group that we were involved in, maybe from language school on. We've had special relationships. And so it's very easy for us to kind of stay concentrated, and we say, well, when we look at our work, it seems like this. But it's when you begin to have conversations. I think of our global leadership team. I think of our global network of trainers.
Yeah.
And we begin to talk about what's
Yes.
going on in other places.
Mhm.
And we have those kinds of conversations. It becomes eye-opening,
Yeah.
but yet inspiring at the same time to say and to hear what kind of teams are on the ground, what kind
Yes.
of work they're doing, what kind of evangelism, discipleship techniques they're using. And that's always encouraging to me. So I think that's another step that
love
as
that.
missionaries we can do, but I think even for the person at home, where they can kind of lean in for some of those missions presentations, or perhaps be involved in some of these conferences that might be available to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to begin to hear and to be able to listen with maybe a different mindset
Yes.
in all of this. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's great. If you could leave our missionaries, our leaders, our listeners with one challenge or encouragement as we're going forward with this gospel access initiative, what would it be?
I would love for us in Africa, one of the things that we focused on for several years was building a one house culture in which we owned the vision to see Africa reached together.
Yeah.
So I may have lived in Tanzania, but when I heard about a celebration or a victory in Ghana, I could celebrate. If there was a church planted in Namibia, if there was a prayer, one of our brothers and sisters, one of our missionary colleagues that needed prayer, I could carry that with them. And as we begin to develop this one house, it aligned our hearts and allowed us to, I think, collectively carry that burden together, which then allowed us to mobilize for each other, pray for each other, celebrate with each other. And together we just go so much further. And wouldn't it be amazing if somehow we could all lean in to this and look at everything that's going on around the world and to own what's left to be done and to commit to walk shoulder to shoulder with those that we serve with, even though we may only see them once every 3 or 4 years when we meet at a conference. I just think AGWM, AG World Missions would be that much better.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. You're developing this idea that we're colleagues. We're not separated by regions or by geography. And we're working together. We can celebrate the wins together. That's awesome.
When Europe gets 5 more missionaries than we do at a candidate orientation, we can be like, thank God there's a need there.
Amen.
And equally, anyways, I love that. And I love the fact that more than ever before, barriers are coming down and opportunities to rub shoulders.
I appreciate that.
To me, it's encouraging.
And, I think Latin America, Caribbean, our Northern Triad area, Mexico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, a lot of people have come to have their first experience in missions with us. My first experience in missions was Dominican Republic. I was an 18-year-old, and just my eyes were open to what God was doing. I didn't serve in Dominican Republic. I've been serving 20 years in Mexico. But we've seen people who've served in Mexico and gone on to Europe, or they've gone on to Northern Africa, gone on to Eurasia. That's exciting.
Yes.
And that's kingdom work.
Yes.
Yeah. So
one does not have to take away from the other.
No.
I had a friend one time, and when he took over the church, it was a very strong foreign missions, world missions focused church. And someone asked him, well, are you going to lower your foreign mission and raise your domestic missions? And he said, absolutely not. He said, I want to raise my domestic missions, but not at the cost of lowering foreign. Why can't we do more in both? And the church became stronger because of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, this has been a great conversation. Thans for taking some time out.
Man, absolutely.
Here with us. Yeah,
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless.